Thanks for being here. We're going to get started in a couple of minutes. Just let everybody file in, both here and online. Thanks for being with us, and we'll get started in a few minutes. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Dr. Brian Henning. I'm a professor of philosophy and environmental studies here at Gonzaga University, where I have the pleasure also of serving as the director of the Gonzaga Institute for Climate, Water, and the Environment. Happy Earth Week. Thank you for being here. Typically, we would have the shades drawn so it doesn't wash it out, but it's just so beautiful out there. And so thank you for being here tonight on this beautiful evening, whether here in person or online, this really important event. The last of our lecture series this semester. I'd like to start off by thanking the people without whom this would not happen, in particular, the wonderful Caitlin Carroll, whom I'm going to embarrass. Caitlin, would you please stand up for a moment and wave to the crowd? Caitlin is the indispensable help that makes all this possible, in addition to all of our wonderful student employees. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for making all of this possible. 5 years ago on Wednesday, we launched this project, if you can believe it. It's already been 5 years since Gonzaga launched this university-wide project trying to figure out how we can take our academic mission, take our teaching, our scholarship, and the passion and direction of our students to be of greater service to the Inland Northwest, to help us to understand and respond to the climate crisis. And we're really honored to be able to do this work. We send undergraduates into K-8 classrooms, and they deliver hands-on lessons to getting young people excited about climate change and climate science and what they can do to address it. We go to all over the region, helping communities to understand and respond to the dangers of extreme heat and wildfire smoke, so that they and their communities are better prepared as we have a changing climate. And so we're really fortunate to be able to do this work with and on behalf of our community. I'd like to also note that we couldn't do this work without the support of people like you, and if you have resources that you are able to share, we really always appreciate it. Hosting events like this is free to you, but not to us, and we also do all sorts of other great stuff in the community, and if you have the means of sharing some resources, we'd like to be able to continue this work for another 5 years, so please consider sharing with us if you're able. This is the first time we've had the honor of co-hosting an event with our colleagues at the Institute for Informatics and Applied Technology. And so I'd like to welcome up to the stage Dr. Jay Yang, who is the Reisenauer Family Director of the Institute for Informatics and Applied Technology here at Gonzaga University, where he provides leadership on the development and application of AI across the education, research, and industry partnerships. With more than 20 years of experience spanning Gonzaga University and Rochester Institute of Technology, he has led over 30 nationally funded research programs in addressing machine learning and artificial intelligence challenges. We're so lucky to have him here at Gonzaga. His current leadership role at the Institute for Informatics and Applied Technology centers on promoting responsible and purposeful AI with pedagogical approaches that transform education and learning in the age of AI. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zayed Yang.
Thank you, Brian. What a way to kick off the Earth Week. I actually only mean that I planted a tree yesterday at my house. We just joined Spokane, Gonzaga about 2 years ago, so this is a great opportunity. Thank you, Brian, for hosting this. It's a great way to kick off not just the Earth Week, but also that we have a series of events coming up for you. I don't think I need to say too much about myself because this is really the event. I want to share with you a little bit about Institute. You might wonder how does a technological institute has to do with climate and energy. Our vision for the Gonzaga Informatics and Applied Technology Institute is really to push this notion of responsible AI, right? It's not just about pushing a technology, it's really to think about its energy consumption, its impact to the environment, to the climate, and also to our human way of thinking. So our mission is really to try to drive, transform higher ed education in general through the proper and responsible use of AI. The way we're achieving that is that we have AI engineers. We have 2 of them sitting right here in the audience. At the time we hired these AI engineers at Gonzaga, we want to make sure that they share the mission, they share the vision. The way they develop technologies is really thinking about how we are not outsourcing learning, how we are making sure that the token usage on large language models is minimized, how we're thinking about all these things is caring for the users. We want to make sure that we not just talk the talk, we walk the talk. We want to make sure that we show our faculty, our students, our staff the right way of doing responsible technology development. So today, very glad to have the opportunity to co-host this event with Brian. And I look forward to learning from Paul, from Josh, and Brian about your wisdom, your insights about this. I have a lot of questions. I will try to reframe myself by asking all those questions. I look forward to it. For us, I think the AI data literacy, climate energy literacy really lead to this notion of how can we be together to create resilient innovation in this domain. I look forward to hearing from you, Brian, Josh, Paul, and Brian. Thank you.
So before I welcome up our speakers, I wanted to do a little bit of level setting to make sure that we're thinking about exactly what moment we find ourselves in when we're talking about how do we go about addressing this new technology. What is the state of our planet? So some of you might be familiar with the idea of the planetary boundary conditions. The Stockholm Resilience Institute has been doing groundbreaking work and trying to help us to understand what are the habitable conditions of the planet, and they look at different categories, and that if we're going to have a functioning human community on a viable planet, then we need to stay within those sustainable boundary conditions. Every year, our planet is able to absorb a certain amount of pollution, creates a certain amount of biomass, and so if we're functioning in a healthy relationship to our planet, we would be within those circles in the green part. For a while now, in different categories, we've been exceeding the sustainable boundary conditions of our planet. And so we're now exceeding 7 out of 9 of those conditions. This is dire. It's no longer clear whether or not our planet will continue to be habitable as the way that we've experienced it in the past. This is a very, very serious concern. Part of that has to do with the amount of greenhouse gases that our planet's able to absorb annually through either biological or chemical processes. So the scientists of the world tell us that if we want to avoid the worst consequences of climate change, we need to try to stay preferably below 1.5 degrees Celsius additional warming. Definitely well below 2 degrees Celsius. Past 2 degrees, we're worried that that's incompatible with civilization as we know it. And so we need to cut emissions to be able to do that. We already know that we're already experiencing consequences with 1.1 degrees Celsius warming, which is what we've already got in the bank. So we're at 1.1. We don't want to, up to 1.5. Beyond that, if you see that red line, that's the trajectory at the business as usual. Twice as much warming as is compatible with civilization is very scary. So if we're going to be able to successfully address this problem, the international group of scientists have told us that we need to dramatically change how we produce energy, how we do transportation, what we eat. And we need to do it very, very quickly. This was true, has been true for quite a long time. The artificial intelligence data center question is a relatively new question. And so what I'm hoping to talk about tonight with our honored guests is how these two things are interacting. Before the data center question came on, this is a super duper simplified version of what we need to do to address our emissions. We need to clean the grid, meaning we need to change how we produce electricity to make it so that we're producing it from cleaner sources. So stop burning coal, stop burning oil, stop burning methane. So that's the cleaning the grid. In Washington State, from my perspective, very thankfully, we passed the Clean Energy Transformation Act, or CETA, which requires us by law to clean the grid. So we've already, in a way, agreed as a state to set ourselves on a path to doing this. We're supposed to be, I think, 80% clean by 2030 and fully clean by 2045 by state law. So number one, hasn't been achieved yet, but we've committed to it as a state. Number two is we need to then move transportation to that cleaner grid. You can imagine if we move our cars and buses to the grid, that's going to require a lot more demand, right? Because things that used to be running on oil is now running on electricity. That electricity is going to be clean, but that increases the demand. So that already makes it more challenging, but is a necessary step if we're going to avoid catastrophic warming. And the third, and especially challenging in places like Eastern Washington, is moving heating of air and heating of water to that cleaner grid as well. How do we heat our water? How do we heat our homes? Because it gets pretty cold here, and you've got to have a way of moving that from heating oil, which we don't use a ton of, or more likely natural gas, to electricity. And that's going to also increase demand very considerably. So far, you're with me? So this is challenging. This was already hard to do. And so now we have this new technology and with all of the energy demands that it's making. And so combine these two together and what we get is an interesting challenge. Right now, today, data center electricity use and emissions, well, this is the consumption on the top and emissions on the bottom is low. Relatively speaking, globally, it's a relatively small share. So it's a concern, but it's not the major source of emissions or energy use today. But by 2030, which for old people like me seems like it's far in the future, but they tell me it's just a couple years away now, it's supposed to dramatically increase. And you'll see that data center electricity demand is going to outstrip a number of other sectors, including space heating and heavy industry. In some countries, half of new demand could come from data centers. That's a serious challenge to meet, that half of all new demand over the next 6 years could, when this is in 24, come from data centers. And to beat that, this is the hard part. How are we going to meet that? Thankfully, renewable sources of energy are already today, in most jurisdictions, the cheapest form of energy. Solar and wind are cheaper than gas and coal and oil today. Just in terms of price, people already prefer renewables. This is great. This is a revolution. This is exactly what we had hoped would happen. But even though we're meeting new demand with renewables, we're not really taking any of the fossil fuels offline. We're not decarbonizing. We're meeting new demand with renewables as fast as we can, but we're really not decarbonizing the current grid. And that sort of is a problem if you think a couple slides ago. So the problem, the worry for me, is that we'll try and meet the demand created by data centers with fossil energy. That even though by law, according to the Clean Energy Transformation Act in Washington State, we have to clean the grid. That's by 2045. If we wanted to, we could meet that demand with burning more methane. We could add new methane plants now and wait until 2045 to try and clean the grid and hope that we figure out a way to do that. That's a potential concern. So this is the question for the panel, and I'll try and formulate it in about 12 different ways about whether or not we can do this. How can we do, is there a way to do both? And what would that look like to try to do both? We have to avoid catastrophic warming. We want to try to figure out how to use this new technology. How can we do both? There are all sorts of things we could do in terms of policy and should do in terms of policy. Last legislative session, just a couple months ago, there was a bill in the legislature that would have begun to do this work, and there's lots of reasons why it didn't yet pass, but what worries me is that some of the largest companies were fighting against it. And so they've got a lot of money, and they don't yet want to have requirements for transparency. They don't yet want to have to do these things that would allow us to make sure that we're meeting our climate goals. So next legislative session will become really important. This should worry us. How do we do this plus address the climate crisis? So that's the task for the evening. We're going to invite up each of the speakers, and they'll have a few minutes to say some opening comments, and then we're going to just have a discussion. We'll discuss amongst ourselves for a while. If you all have some good questions, we might throw it out to the crowd. We'll see how it goes. That's the plan for the evening. So our first speaker is Brian Rybarek. He's the chair of the Washington State Utilities and Transportation Commission and a member of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, Electricity and Critical Infrastructure Committees, Committee of State Representatives for the Western Resource Adequacy Program, and Federal and State Current Issues Collaborative. Washington State Governor Bob Ferguson appointed Rybarek to serve on the Washington State Office of the Chief Information Officer Technology Services Board. Before the commission, Rybarek held various leadership roles at Microsoft, including leading a team focused on protecting the rights of people in Microsoft's supply chains. He also served as a chief of staff for Microsoft's corporate sustainability team and was part of Microsoft's data-centered energy team. Rybarek has also been the vice president of policy for the Clean Grid Alliance and deputy general counsel at Mid-American Energy Company. He started his legal career in private practice at the law firm of Michael Best and has also worked in the Wisconsin legislature. Rybarek earned his bachelor's in law degree from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. Please join me in welcoming Brian Rybarek. Our second guest is Paul Dietz. He's a senior manager in forecasting and market analytics with Grant County Public Utility District here in Washington State. Dietz brings deep expertise in energy economics, state and federal public policy development, and energy markets, including environmental fiat asset markets. He's held leadership roles at major utilities, including Evergy, Xcel Energy, NRG Energy, and Grant County Public Utility District, where he is now. As a certified financial risk manager, he excels at navigating the dynamic and rapidly evolving landscape of the electric utility industry, a sector that he feels will continue to experience unprecedented growth and change well into the next decade. Join me in welcoming Paul Dietz. And then our third guest this evening is Joshua Basafin. He works to advance clean energy policies in Oregon, including implementation of HB 2021, the state's groundbreaking clean energy law. Basafin also works in coalitions to identify clean energy pathways for industry. He seeks consensus on siting and permitting of renewable energy facilities and extend the benefits of our clean energy transition to rural parts of Oregon. Basafin has held many roles in the environmental field, and he began his career working in conservation with a focus on freshwater fisheries, marine protected areas, deserts, and wetlands. He spent several years as a sustainability advisor for businesses, And he served as the first director of climate action for Parliament of the World's Religions, the oldest interfaith organization in the US. Basafin is particularly interested in the intersections within the environmental movement where coalitions of advocates, businesses, faiths, and communities can be created. Basafin holds a BA in English and Environmental Studies and a JD with a concentration in environmental law. Join me in welcoming Joshua Basafin. All right, so I'll invite you up, Brian, you can do it there or here. Where would you prefer?
Well, I'm going to sit because I think the most important part of today is the discussion we're going to have collectively. So why don't we kind of stay together as a group? I don't know if you all are going to get up and use the podium. That would kind of embarrass me if we did that now. But I'm going to start with a poll. How many of you have used, and online this is going to be hard because we can't see your hands, but we're going to raise our hands. How many of you have used a data center today? And every hand should be up in the audience because we've all used a data center today in some way, shape, or form. When I drove here, I used a mapping function that probably used a data center somewhere, right? How many of you, my second question of a two-poll question, have used AI today? I'm going to prove to you at the end of this that I also used AI today. So I'm Brian Rybaric, as just introduced. I'm the chair of the Utilities and Transportation Commission. We are the state agency that regulates the state's investor-owned utilities. That's investor-owned utilities. We'll talk about what the differences between those are. But like Avista, for those of you who live here in the Spokane area, and we have some representatives from Avista here tonight as well. But that's different than consumer-owned utilities, who you'll hear from with Grant County here. To cut to the chase of the question, can we do this? Yeah, I think we can. I think we can do both, but I am inherently an optimist by nature, and I also recognize that's going to kind of change. We're going to have to do something humans have never done before. As you were showing the slides, Brian, I remembered a data point that I'd seen before, that we burn more wood today in the world than when wood was our primary source of energy. That's just a numbers game, right? We have more people than we've ever had before. We have more need. We have more uses of energy than we've ever had before. So anyway, really looking forward to the discussion today. Let's get to the discussion, but I'll sort of give you my thoughts to start with. First, timely discussion today with Earth Day around the corner. I'm glad we're kicking off Earth Week here. That's an important milestone, not just because it's a day of focus on environmental issues, but for someone from Wisconsin, as you heard from my educational background, it's great. It's the home state of Gaylord Nelson. For those of you who know Earth Day history, that is the godfather of Earth Day. And I thank Gaylord Nelson every year because April 22nd is also my mother's birthday. And so every calendar in the world has a great reminder for me to call my mother, and let that be a great reminder to all of you as we celebrate Mother Earth on Wednesday. Call your mother or remember your mother. Second, I think it's timely, and the headlines of the day remind us of the geopolitical situation that we are in and the stakes of our energy choices every day. Conflict in the Middle East continues to highlight the costs of an economy built on fossil fuels and the urgency of accelerating this energy transition, not just to reduce emissions, but to increase security as well. And third, as Brian noted in the introduction, this discussion is particularly interesting to me as a utility regulator, because there's a significant nexus between energy use and AI, but also prior to my appointment, as Brian just noted, I worked at Microsoft. I was part of that time was as chief of staff for the corporate sustainability team. So working at two nexi, is that the right plural of nexus, of AI and energy and sustainability, bringing those perspectives to you all today. So I'm going to start with some macro level thoughts and then kind of get down to some of the work that we're doing at the UTC. And some of my macro level thoughts are much more focused on sort of my past work, maybe not my present work. And I should start with a disclaimer. The UTC is a 3-member commission, of which I am one. So everything I say here today is my opinion, my view, not the view of the commission in any way. So as I mentioned, the headlines about geopolitics and war, the headlines are also a reminder of the importance of AI to our economy. And I'm not talking about headlines, talking about layoffs because companies have decided to lay people off because they've put AI into their systems. That's a very important part of the discussion, particularly if you were one of the people laid off during those times. But more specifically, I'm thinking about the value that we see in the S&P 500. And probably a lot, if you're lucky enough to have a 401k, the value of that is dependent on AI. And here's why. 7 companies in the world make up 35% of the S&P 500. Amazon, Alphabet, I'm going to try and get them all by memory. Apple, who just announced a new CEO today, and they had to do that after the market closed because that has massive market implications. Microsoft, Meta, NVIDIA, and Tesla. They all have a few things in common. They're all AI companies. So AI is 35% of the market that we look at. And they are all dependent on energy for their return on investment in those AI, in that AI. So there's good news out there, of course. AI is bringing important discovery to things like health diagnosis. I just heard from a colleague a couple weeks ago who was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer that they caught because a radiologist had applied AI models and caught it very early. That's a great story. That's incredible. Like, we should be applauding the power of this. We see new battery discoveries. That happened at Microsoft while I was there, finding new ways and new chemistries to store energy, and the potential for fusion energy. We have a facility being built in Wenatchee right now, and a lot of the discovery that's coming back is from AI discoveries. So getting back to those big seven, though, what I do want to just stress is that all 7 of those companies have aggressive sustainability goals. I know one of those companies' sustainability goals really well, but they all have really aggressive sustainability goals. And so another piece that's really worth mentioning is that those companies combined have more money than God, and I know that we're at a Jesuit institution here, so I want to be very thoughtful about the wealth of God, probably infinite wealth, but I'm not sure his market capitalization gets to $4 trillion. And I think what's an interesting point about that is if you took the market capitalization of every publicly traded utility in the country, that gets just about $1 trillion, just a little over $1 trillion. So every utility combined up is $1 trillion. NVIDIA today, over $4 trillion of market capitalization. So one company has a market capitalization 4 times the entire industry that it is entirely dependent on. So the incentives seem in the right place to me for us to truly transform the grid. I got my notes here, and I'm like losing my space here because I'm getting all excited about this. But so what's the rub, right? We have the incentives in the right place. We've got companies with lots of money. We've got companies with sustainability goals. We've got companies that are dependent on energy. How are we not greening the grid as fast as we can? Well, humans are a lot like electrons. We follow the path of least resistance, right? And we see the investments from these companies and invest in innovations like direct air capture, small modular reactors, fusion, geothermal plants. It's excellent that they're taking these risks, but those are longer term solutions. The need to green the grid is immediate, and the available paths to speed to power, which is a term you'll hear a lot in this industry, all seem to come with some level of emissions to them. So at the same time, we have a federal administration that's removing tax credits for clean energy options. They're putting in orders to keep coal plants open, including one here in Washington, and our CO2 levels are rising. So with that, I also want to recognize the reality of the situation. And I recognize the importance of a portfolio approach. The UTC, the agency that I lead, has really been an affordability and reliability agency. We want people to have access to energy that is affordable and reliable. That's been our history for 120 years. More recently, with the passage of CETA and the CCA, we see the need for that energy to be clean. That's a new challenge for us, but I do recognize we can't just move to wind, solar, batteries at the flip of a switch. It takes some very thoughtful planning and a long-term approach, and that transition is going to include emissions. You heard it from here first, folks. In my 413 days at the commission, we've approved 2 plans that include some form of natural gas plant. And I see that as a bridge to our future. It's an important bridge. It's not a be-all, end-all. What I worry about is a mad rush to significantly more fossil fuels to meet that growing demand, and then we have sunk costs and a slower transition. So what do we need to do to green the grid? First, we need more grid. From my view, I don't see a path to decarbonization without more transmission and interregional connectivity. And on this front, the West presents some very unique challenges. We have long distances between locations. We have a lot of federal land ownership, and we have a federal power marketing administration in the middle of all that that controls much of the transmission system in Washington particularly. Our geography gives us incredible diversity with the sun in some places, wind in others, and a great, what I think is the world's largest battery in the Pacific Northwest hydro system. So if we connect all that up and we make that work, we can meet those challenges. But our Western way makes building that infrastructure very difficult. So on top of that, I think we need more flexibility from the load itself. Data centers have not been constructed with flexibility in mind, and now we're seeing this need to sort of make sure that they are flexible, because if we're building to peak power and we can lower that peak that the data center uses, we can meet these challenges in a much more sensible, more affordable, and more reliable way. Now, all of that, interestingly enough, you're gonna think I have Stockholm Syndrome, not the Stockholm Resilience Institute. All of that is a lot of data analysis, a lot of work that's gonna need data crunching. So what you're hearing me say is we need more AI because we have AI. That should get like a lot of like laugh. I was hoping that would get some laughs from everybody. But anyway, my real joke on that is, I don't know if you know this, but Microsoft signed a deal to keep 3 Mile Island, or to bring 3 Mile Island back online. So a deal to bring more carbon-free energy to the grid. 3 Mile Island, the acronym is TMI. And I was like, oh, of course, we need TMI because we have TMI. Oh, man. Yeah. It's really setting it up for these guys. All right. So where does the rubber hit the road with my actual job? As Brian identified, CETA and CCA create mandates for us to transition to clean energy. If we're gonna meet these challenges, the state of Washington has mandates, as do a number of other states. But I see the issue of AI and energy coming to UTC as part of a much broader affordability discussion that we're having across the country as well. I think across Washington, across a lot of cities in Washington, including a lot here in Spokane, families are struggling with rising costs, and that is the issue that comes to us every day. So I recently met with a group of commission chairs from around the nation, and it was oddly comforting to hear that we're all facing some of the similar challenges, interconnecting large loads like data centers, investing in reliability, managing wildfire risks, and implementing clean energy laws were things that all came up. But each of these pressures puts some pressure on affordability. Combined, they put on significant pressures on affordability. So here in Washington, what are we working on? I served on a work group convened by the governor to examine how we can balance economic development from data centers, and I think Paul will talk a lot about the value of that in the Grant County area, with their energy needs. And that group produced 8 recommendations. I have a couple members of the work group here in the audience tonight. Those recommendations ranged from strengthening ratepayer protections to improving energy forecasting and transmission planning, all things that are really important to me in this energy transition. Those recommendations informed this legislative proposal that Brian mentioned, 2515, focused on data centers and energy. And while that didn't pass, what the UTC has done now is opened our own investigation into data centers and energy and large loads and how we interconnect those. The goal is to make sure that we find ways to minimize the impacts on other customers. This is really an affordability focus, if not avoid those impacts on other customers. So the first workshop in that docket is next week, and we'll draw on lessons from other states, places like Oregon, which we hear from here, places like Grant County, and a lot of the work that we do across the country. So this is the backdrop of my daily work, but this is our shared work. As we started with that poll, who's used a data center, who's used AI today? The fact of the matter is it's all of our accountability to make sure that these companies building AI data centers are responsible for the costs they impose on the grid and are responsible for the sustainability commitments that they've made. Now I gotta find my final page here because I had AI write me a conclusion and I wanna really land this. Hold on, I get this all out of order. AI didn't help me at all. All right, you guys ready for this? I'm looking forward to today's discussion and exploring how we can meet this moment with urgency, innovation, and a clear-eyed understanding of the challenges and opportunities ahead. Thank you. How did AI do? All right.
That was really funny. I loved it. Yeah, so, well, how did we get here? That's a really good question. You have to kind of look at the history of Washington State. You want me to get a little bit closer? There we go. Wow, I could actually sing with this. Holy smokes. So, how did we get here? How did Washington State get here? I think that Washington State has always been a leader in innovating. I think they're really trying to set the pathway and make it clear, that there is a way that we can get to a carbon-free world, but we kind of have to pay attention to the details. So my name is Paul Dietz. I work with Grant County PUD. Have a great team of analysts who are thinking a lot about this issue. We're very interactive with the state in helping not only implement CETA and CCA, but also in providing recommendations for how that public policy is affecting utilities in
Paul, before we use
state.
those acronyms too much more, because I should have called Brian on it. One more time for everybody, the acronyms you're just using. Define those real fast. I mentioned one of them, but not the second one. The CCA.
Yeah, the CCA. Okay. So just really just to level set everything, the Climate Commitment Act is really intended to regulate every emission other than what's happening in with electric utilities. So this is natural gas. Avista is covered by this quite a bit. Same with Puget Sound. So it is essentially, it establishes the quantity of allowances that are required for anyone who is actually responsible for emitting CO2 into the Washington State atmosphere. If you're doing that, you have to actually submit an allowance that you procured from a marketplace by some means. And so it doesn't apply to electric utilities, but does for natural gas utilities. Every time you gas up your car, if you're wondering why you're paying $5 plus right now, about 75 cents of that is a result of the allowance that has to be procured so that gallon of gas can be burned. So it's doing it's doing what it's intended to do, which is to make sure that we know what the actual price of burning fossil fuels are. So when we heat our homes with natural gas, you're paying the extra price to account for that the CO2 emission. And every time you drive an internal combustion vehicle, you're also paying for that emission. So why is that important? Well, for Grant County, we're almost 100% electric. The only people who really aren't electric are the ones who are too far away from the road and you can't really afford the wire to your house, and so you burn propane. And so Grant County is in a bit of a unique position because we're not having to electrify very much at all. That's good. I mean, from our perspective, we see it. The question that's in our minds when we're talking about this kind of public policy is whose power is it that we're really talking about? For Grant County, it's the power that's coming off the dams that were actually sited and constructed by people who were needing power in the 1950s and who got that power in the 1960s. So a lot of the greening up of central Washington, the miracle that you see over there, the food that we're able to produce in Grant County is a direct result of the dams that we produced. For the longest time, we had surplus power, which was great because we could supply power to the region generally, which we did through power sales contracts. Along comes a little bit of growth. Our economy starts to get healthy. We're seeing a lot of people wanting to move to Grant County, so we are seeing some growth in residential and small commercial. But we also saw, we saw Microsoft in 2014. They came, they wanted to have a data center. We thought that was really good. So that was the beginning of a long history of development, and so we now have a lot of computational capacity in Grant County. And just to be clear, data centers are a generic term. Anyone who looks like, hey, I need to go from point A to point B, if you open up maps, tell me how to get there, you're interacting with a data center, but that's not AI. If you take a picture and you automatically save that to the web, you're interacting with a data center, but it's not AI. So I do want to point out that a lot of the data centers that are existing right now are to really supply us with the services that we have already grown accustomed to. AI ends up being an increment to that. And so that to me is a good thing. I do want to emphasize that we see this as an American-led innovation, right? And so if it weren't for the fact that we had Microsoft and others pushing forward into this space, we would not be able to realize the benefits that AI can provide us. But what are those benefits? If anyone has invested money in the stock market, if you did it in the 90s and you waited until about, I don't know, 2010, you would have seen a pretty significant increase as a result of the use of data centers in the more traditional sense. Now, if you're invested, you're probably going to be seeing many, many times that return as a direct result of AI being incorporated into corporate business activities today. So I'll be clear, AI is being used today. It's being used by people like us all in the room, casually, and by businesses routinely every single day to improve their overall efficiency. So we see this as actually an economic gain overall for us. We're really happy to be able to supply the load that we have there in Grant County. It's, you know, the benefit to us is actually fairly profound. If you look at our website, you're going to find out that we've just instituted a change in the way that we charge customers. We've split them into two groups. We have the core customers. The core customers are our residential consumers. There are small businesses. There are irrigators, all of the farmers who actually built those dams. Those core customers are going to get the benefit of the dams in the rates that we charge them. But they're also going to be getting a benefit from the power that we're selling to the data centers. Because the data centers are paying more than their costs, and we're taking that benefit and moving it over to the core customers, from non-core to core. That's great as far as, you know, when you think about what we're able to do and to support the traditional activities of Grant County, the agricultural work that we're doing there, and the development of new neighborhoods and new communities. This is going to be a big benefit for us, and it's going to ensure that we all are getting the lowest priced power as possible. So the question that I have for folks is, whose power is it anyway? What are we talking about here? 9 times out of 10, it's going to be the power that's being developed by your own utilities. So Avista is very quickly trying to figure out how they can get new capacity developed. They want to meet their climate commitment goals. They want to green up their power, but they also want to encourage the development of new economic activity. This will lead to stronger communities in this region. It'll lead to quite a bit more wealth being generated by people in Spokane and Spokane Valley. If you think about what Avista is going to be able to do by committing to supplying AI in the region, in addition to meeting their goals, I think you might find that as somewhat appealing. Folks in the room might not be aware, we are transitioning from a regional view of the world, a regional economy, to an integrated marketplace. There will come a day in the near future where you're going to be able to get your power delivered to you from remote sources. So I'm talking about solar fields that are in Arizona or that are in Nevada, being sent to us, those electrons being sent to us to meet our load. And when we have surplus wind, we'll be sending them power. when we have wind from the Midwest, we will actually be able to facilitate the movement of wind to us. So the cool thing about what we're doing as utilities, by adding transmission, and particularly transmission that transcends boundaries, we're able to more efficiently dispatch units and more efficiently deliver power to where it's going. So we have a lot of gains that we can make just by building out our transmission system. And that's even before we start building new power plants. But that's what I want.
Thanks. Well, I don't mean to embarrass Brian by getting up to the podium, but I do have some slides because I like optical references. Okay, great. Well, thank you, Brian, and to the Institute for having me as a guest here. It's great to be with you all. Just, I guess, as a predicate, two predicates. One, as Brian mentioned, I'm a climate advocate and a policy guy, so that's the perspective you're gonna get during my talk. I think, Brian, you've actually curated a really great group of people up here with diverse perspectives. The second caveat is I'm an Oregonian. Thank you for allowing me to cross your border. And so when I discuss policy, I've tried to kind of balance it out and talk about both Oregon and Washington, but just bear in mind, I do work exclusively in policy in Oregon, so that's the perspective I'm coming from. So the reason that I put a picture of a puzzle up on my first slide is because I really do believe that solving the data center and clean energy question is a puzzle. How are we going to provide enough energy for the enormous number of data centers that are projected to come online? How are we going to ensure that that's eventually renewable energy in compliance with Washington and Oregonian state law? How are we going to stay on track for our climate goals as all of those new data centers come online? How are we going to build enough transmission to get that eventually clean energy to those data centers? And how are we going to properly allocate the costs of that energy and that transmission infrastructure to the operators of those data centers? These are all questions that my fellow panelists have brought up, and I think that those are really the relevant questions. Which way do I go? Not that way. Not that way. It's got to be one of these.
You found your first puzzle.
Or you could just ask them to
Okay. So why do we have so many data centers in the Pacific Northwest, particularly in Oregon, which is, depending on which statistic you look at, either the second or the third largest market for data centers in the country? Washington also has quite a few, but Oregon has more. We have relatively cheap energy here in our region, thanks in part at least to the hydropower system. We have very good proximity to undersea data cables, which are very important for data centers. And particularly in Oregon, we have extremely generous property tax abatement policies. So the counties are actually the entities that hammer out the agreements for the data centers to come in and build and develop and site. And they have the authority to give them property tax breaks. I think here in Washington, it might actually be sales tax abatement. In Oregon, it's property tax abatement. But those are pretty significant incentives. This is a multifaceted challenge. We're looking at potentially 4 gigawatts on average of data center load growth. That's the projection from the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, which is in the business of crunching data and projecting these sorts of things. Just to give you a reference, that's like 5 Seattles worth of energy on average growth. We have an aging and constrained transmission system. We haven't really modernized or improved it in like 40 years. We have a rudimentary regional energy market. Other parts of the country have a regional transmission organization where a number of states band together and have a central operator that's able to build out transmission for them. We don't have that here. We basically balance our transmission system in real time. we're moving towards a day-ahead market where we would balance it 24 hours in advance. But that's really a long way from that kind of central operator that you have in a regional transmission organization. And we have pretty slow growth of new renewable resources, and that's because we care a lot about land, and land is important, habitat's important, ecology is important, agriculture is important, but because we care about those things, we spend a lot of time thinking about and debating where and if to build new renewable resources. So data centers in the US, and I know Brian had a statistic that was around 1% globally, but in the US use about 4%, 4.5% of all energy. AI queries use exponentially more. I've seen around 5 times the energy for an AI search as compared to a conventional Google search. And when you get into like ChatGPT, it's even more than that. It could be 10 times or more as much energy as a conventional Google search. And by 2028, more than half of the electricity going to data centers will be used for AI as that area grows. That's the equivalent of 22% of all US households. That gives you just an idea of the immense breadth of this issue. So we've got a lot of climate policies in the PNW that we've passed in the last 5 to 10 years. The Climate Commitment Act here in Washington was mentioned. We have a counterpart to that, which is our Climate Protection Program. That was issued through executive order, but it does roughly the same thing. It caps emissions and slowly creates declines on those emissions. And then we have also a counterpart to your Clean Electricity Law, 100% clean for all. Our target date for that is 2040. Your target date for 100% clean electricity is 2045. Not to gloat, but ours is a little bit sooner. We're a little bit more ambitious. And then we have rules restricting the development of new gas-powered energy facilities in Oregon. You may have those in Washington, I'm not sure. So backsliding on these climate goals is a really, really significant risk. A recent report issued by the consulting firm E3, commissioned by a number of utilities in the region, called for expansion of gas-powered energy facilities, significant expansion, many, many gigawatts of gas peaking facilities to fill in where we have resource adequacy issues going forward. In Oregon, where Amazon data facilities are sited, in the service territory of the Umatilla Electric Cooperative, those emissions for that cooperative have gone up 543% since 2010 when Amazon arrived. And that's because they're going out to the market and buying a lot of dirty energy to serve those data centers. So the pathway to achieving these clean energy targets is really becoming constrained in part due to data centers. It's now predicted that Oregon could miss its 2035 decarbonization goal of 45% cut below 1990 levels by at least 2 years, in part due to data center growth. So these are real significant risks that we're looking at going forward. So the key question, which Brian, our esteemed director, also framed up is, can we accommodate data centers while progressing toward a clean energy transition? I think that's really kind of the seminal question. And I want to give you, I'm trying to be proactive here, not be kind of like, the sky is falling, although it is a formidable challenge. I want to give you 5 solutions from my vantage point of how we could do this. One is we need a lot of battery energy storage systems. So right now, data centers generally have diesel backup generators. So there's significant impacts on local air quality from pollution, localized air pollution from those diesel generators. There's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, and they are at odds, obviously, with state climate policy. We can shift to battery energy storage systems, which store renewable energy, and allow those data centers to load flex during curtailment events. So because we have these potential reliability issues on the grid, we may have to curtail the energy going to data centers, and we may have to cut them off at points. And when we do that, if they have fleets of batteries that are full of renewable energy, they can rely on those during those curtailment periods, and they're actually using renewable energy. Those can also be a grid resource. They can flow back to the grid. They can give the grid some renewable energy back. Google has large BESS projects in Minnesota and Michigan that they've recently developed, and the first PNW data center BESS project is coming online in 2026, so that's very exciting. Second, bring your own new clean energy, affectionately acronymed Beyonce. This is happening now, but it's not yet scaled. Data centers can go out to the market, get their own clean energy. They don't necessarily have to work through a utility, or they can ask their utility to help them go to wholesale markets, or they can procure directly from facilities. So a couple examples, Amazon recently purchased the 1 gigawatt Sunstone project in Oregon, which is very exciting. Google and Xcel Energy have partnered in Minnesota to bring 2 gigawatts of clean power online for Google's data centers there. But a potential risk here is that if we're not increasing the overall pie of renewable energy, the data center operators are just going out and scooping up everything that's available in the market, but not actually expanding or scaling the market. And we really want to see the market growing. Solution 3, energy efficiency measures. So there is, always innovations in energy efficient hardware, servers, new technologies that data centers could be implementing. But I think what's really pertinent here is the cooling technologies. Data centers use energy for 2 reasons. One is obviously to power the servers. The other is to cool those servers because when you have a laptop on your lap, you feel a lot of heat from that. Just imagine an enormous building full of servers. They emit a lot of heat. And right now, generally speaking, we're using circulated air to cool them. That's incredibly inefficient. So there's liquid immersion technologies. There's a kind of like goo that it's electronic safe, and you can dip the servers into that goo. And you just think about you're covering much more surface area on the server, and it's much more efficient. Heat reuse is really exciting. So in Denmark, they actually extract the heat from the data centers, and that's a form of energy that can be reused. They pipe that out to homes and businesses, and you can heat those homes and businesses with that waste heat from data centers. We should be doing that here. Free cooling, that's pumping cool air from outside in the ambient air outside the data center into the data center. Now you have to have, obviously, cooler temperatures outside the data center to be able to do that. Fourth solution, we need significant investment in emergent renewables. So we've got some wind and we've got some solar, but we really need next-gen geothermal. And we really need offshore wind. There are some political challenges right now that our federal government has provided us with on offshore wind, but very hopeful that eventually we'll be able to get that kind of resource going. In Oregon, we have potentially 3 gigawatts of installed capacity of offshore wind off our south coast. That's a really important resource. Green hydrogen is a little bit trickier because you need clean electricity to go into an electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen. So you want to make sure that you're using that kind of strategically. Otherwise, it's not really a net gain, but there may be some tactical uses for green hydrogen. Now, this has been talked about a little bit. Tech companies have a lot of money, and they're expending quite a bit of that capital on artificial intelligence. And we ought to be asking that they invest, in these kinds of technologies. If they want to bring data centers online and they want to expand artificial intelligence, we really need them to be helping us to scale these kinds of emergent renewables in order to power those data centers and ensure grid reliability for the rest of us. So the fifth and final solution is distributed energy resources. So we've talked a lot about utility scale, about the big solar and wind farms. We should be covering every data center and solar panels. We should have buffers of land around data centers. We can do ground-mounted solar where we can potentially put up wind turbines. We should be really extracting as much potential renewable energy generation from in and around those data centers. We should also be looking at small-scale renewables that can be built faster and with smaller capital and are potentially easier to site. We should be looking at microgrids, which are generating resources like solar with batteries that can connect and disconnect from the grid. Those could be really useful for data centers, and again, are kind of like tactical resources. And then we should be investing in residential technologies. There was a report by Rewiring America recently where they said, data center operators should be purchasing or investing in things like solar on residential rooftops, heat pumps in residences, and batteries in residences. And what does that do? That reduces that increases the capacity of the grid by as much as 30%, and it allows those residences to be more energy independent, and it unlocks energy on the grid for those data centers. So it's very much in the interest of data center operators to be helping to invest in those kinds of residential technologies. So we've got to solve this problem. It is an existential crisis. We have to decarbonize and maintain grid reliability as we absorb new data center growth. It will be expensive, but big tech will spend $650 billion in AI just this year, rising soon to the trillions. Necessity is the mother of invention. We need bold solutions for big challenges. And I will just leave you with this thought that our states are hosting data centers, and we are providing them with significant infrastructure. In some cases, we're providing them with tax incentives. And we ought to be asking that they be partners in co-creating the solutions for our clean energy transition. Thanks.
All right. So I think we've got a good plate set here. Start thinking about questions that you might have. Maybe we'll start, Brian, is there anything keeping us from doing the 5 things that Joshua was just talking about? We could be doing them now. Why aren't we doing them now?
Well, I mean, I didn't write down all 5 of them, so I'm going to go off of memory here. But I think there's a handful of those that you are seeing. There's kind of a mixture of what should we be doing on the grid and what should data centers be doing at the data center site is the way I kind of understood the situation there. Where I think you're seeing examples of the data center industry recognizing they have a social license to operate issue right now as well, right? I think Paul said it really well. We've built a lot of this infrastructure in the 50s and the 60s, and we had a lot of slack in that system, and it was really easy to put data centers onto a grid when you have slack. And that is something that all of us have collectively paid for a really, really long time, to have that slack available. Well, when one industry comes and kind of takes up all that slack, now we have sort of the next increment problem to solve. And the issue with that is we've always done this as a utility regulatory commission on a non-discriminatory basis. We've done a cost of service study, and we allocate the costs to our customers. So when I hear from Grant County that, well, we're actually kind of breaking that model a little bit to say we're actually going to have you pay more than your cost of service, those are the types of innovations that we need to see in the regulatory structure. So what's stopping us? A little bit of history and a little bit of the laws that constrain us at a utility commission from the ways that we set rates. I will also say there's some technology issues with all of that need to be addressed. But ultimately, I think what's stopping us is I think we're trying to find this balance between how heavy-handed of regulation do we want to impose on the data center industry, and how much do we want the data center industry to innovate and bring those solutions to us? And I think we're really struggling with finding that balance point.
Let's stick with that for just a second. So you had mentioned that the UTC, the Utilities and Transportation Commission in Washington, has these obligations for affordability, reliability, and now clean. And those are, I think, goals that a lot of us here would share. We want electricity to be affordable. We compared to the rest of the country, even though no one likes our bills, we have really inexpensive electricity. And we want to keep it affordable. And it needs to be reliable. We want it to be there when we need it. Some people's life and death depends on it. And yet now if we want to have a habitable planet, we also need to have clean electricity. We can't really not do the third one, even though it seems like the new one on the block. There's a good reason why the state has adopted that. That next increment is what worries me. What's to keep us from just building? Maybe go to you, Paul. In Grant County, is there anything keeping us from just building gas plants to meet the additional demand? Under the regulatory conditions we have, you could do that, and then as long as you, by 2045, you meet your regulatory obligations, you could build those new plants into your rate base. If the Utilities and Transportation Commission approves them, they might become stranded assets in 2045. But what's to keep utilities from doing that now rather than going renewables? Is there anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's talk a little bit about regulatory whack-a-mole. The fact is, I wouldn't build any natural gas generation anywhere in the center of Washington State because they don't have the pipelines in place. So it's kind of hard to take delivery of a commodity that isn't available to you. It's far different on the west side of the mountains where everything is very well piped, and Oregon's also very well piped, but not central Washington. So what's our fallback? Well, one solution would be to go to a state that maybe eschews all of this and says, we're not gonna go down that path at all, and that would be Idaho, right? But they are wired. They have a lot of gas coming down from Canada. And so, a utility, and this is not, I'm not saying this is Grant County, but a utility in Washington could simply pipe the power in through the transmission system and then cut that off at 2045. So the investment would have some payback from Washington, and then it would have to convert. But that would buy you some time. The E3 study, and the folks of E3 do an excellent job. I've worked personally with them and consulted with them quite a bit. I know the quality of work that they do, and they're not really, they're telling it as it is, that it's virtually impossible for us, even without data centers, to reach our goals. We need to have some kind of flexibility. And so, I think that has to be part of our solution. You can't get there from here without some kind of transition phase, is really what they're communicating. Now, is that true? Is that accurate? As accurate as any model that I've seen. It's how are we going to actually do this? You have to step 1, step 2, step 3. You can't hope for speculative capital to come in and solve the problem if you don't have a pathway for paying back that capital and for getting the kind of I guess the kind of market-based solution that you're really kind of seeking if you want to have a robust solution to the problem.
On the affordability front, Joshua, I know in Oregon you've passed a law which is trying to make sure that the cost of additional transmission and generation is not just shared by all ratepayers, that data centers were, for example, would have to pay for that. Could you talk a little bit about that law and I'm confused how transmission, I understand how you could allocate that to a large corporation, but my understanding from rate cases is that it's very complicated to disentangle all of the different variables having to do with additional demand is from everyone and everything. And so when a utility says, well, don't worry, when this data center comes in, we'll make them pay for all of it, it seems hard to imagine exactly how you would know exactly how much of the additional demand on the grid was just theirs. And maybe I'm not, so tell us a little bit about Oregon and how it works or isn't working there.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So in our 2025 legislative session in Oregon, we passed a bill called the POWER Act. It stands for Protecting Oregonians with Energy Responsibility. And it was the first bill in the country that did this. There's a lot of other states that are thinking about it now. And there's also a bill in Congress that's looking at this as well I think it's called the Power to the People Act. But essentially what it does is it says that data centers have to have the cost of the transmission and infrastructure and energy capacity that they use fully allocated to them. Now, the way that those costs have been allocated in the past is they've been kind of peanut buttered across all the rate classes. And the idea is that we're all kind of using that infrastructure in one capacity or another, and so let's just spread it out to all the rate classes. Well, first of all, we've had, I think, 30% rate increases in Portland General Electric territory, so we're already paying significantly more. And second of all, we've never had this kind of need for such expanded transmission infrastructure as we have with just the sheer number of data centers coming online. So that's the bill, and it essentially creates a separate rate class for data centers so that we can take all of those costs and, like, in a rate case, basically, like, put them in the bucket of the data centers so that data centers can pay for them. Now, as Brian sort of alluded to, that's easier said than done, as is often the case with legislation. You know, the legislature says, go do this, and the state agency, in this case, the Public Utility Commission in Oregon, which is tasked with actually implementing it, has to figure out what's the math around that, what's the algorithm to actually figure that out, because it's not quite as simple. You can't just draw a line and say data centers use this infrastructure, and, you know, residential customers, commercial customers, other industrial commercial customers use this other infrastructure. It's all kind of wrapped in together. I think one of the important points is that, you know, new infrastructure, it's kind of like when you pay down the cost of your car. Like, it's a lot of money. You might buy a $20,000 car and you pay it off over time. Well, 10 years in, it's a lot less money that you have left to pay, right? And so the costs are amortized over time. But the problem is that data centers need a lot of new infrastructure. They need new, you know, potentially substations. They need new line extensions. They might need new interties. And that stuff just costs more because it's new. And so that's, I think, where it's really important that we figure out how to do that allocation. But again, it's, you know, we're I don't know, 6 months into dealing with the implementation of this, and we're doing it first Portland General Electric, and then we're going to move on to PacifiCorp, our other major utility. We're going to do them one by one, and it's going to take some time and some thought to figure it out.
Brian?
And I'll just add, you're hitting on some key points here, and when we have a rate case at the UTC, the testimony is in the thousands and thousands of pages. Thank God for AI, we can help us process these cases faster. But that's a joke. What is important to recognize there is was just mentioned, it's complicated. And when you think about the direct costs, so in the governor's work group, we had a lot of data center companies that came and said, we are willing to pay our fair share. Well, now the debate turns to, what does that mean? Your fair share is different probably than my view of what a fair share is. And so now we get to that debate, and that's what lands with us at the UTC. And then it gets more complex to me is when we talk about the direct costs, if there is a substation that is going right next to a data center and there's nothing else there, a lot of times these are built in cornfields or fields, that's pretty clear. That's a direct cost. Now, if we have a study that says we need a transmission grid that can provide clean energy and support the load growth of a region, and that means we're going to have interregional transmission across from Arizona to Washington, from the Great Plains to Washington, and here's the cost of that. Well, who caused that cost? That's a much more challenging thing to say, oh, data centers caused that cost, let's charge the data centers. Well, which data centers caused that particular cost? So it gets a lot more complicated when you're looking at the indirect costs of having to build a grid. And in the past, we've had load growth of maybe 0.25%, 0.5%, maybe. For the most part, we've had a lot of energy efficiency eating up and reducing our overall grid needs. Now you have, as was pointed out, you have effectively cities dropping into the middle of grids. This is a very different challenge than what we've had to address before. So some of it is just the challenge of like getting our heads around. If we want to think about direct costs, much easier. If we want to include indirect costs, much, much harder.
Yep, Paul?
Yeah, just a couple things on this. Earlier we heard that when you bring in a data center, sometimes it creates peaks, right, that need to be shaved. I think that's true, but this is salient to the question, whose costs? A data center has a very high load factor. That means that they're constant and pretty close to 98% of the time, they're demanding the exact same amount of power. So you might call them a base load, in fact, okay? When they come in, they go on the bottom of the stack and they push everyone else up. And so these peaks that we're talking about are really the revealed demand from residential customers. Okay, so when you ask the data center then to bring in batteries, or at least pay for you to bring in batteries, what you're really trying to solve is the problem of residential consumption being like having plenty of peaks and valleys. A load factor of around 50%, so, you know, give or take. So how do you allocate those costs, right? It's, the data center didn't cause the peaks. You know, how are you gonna, so it becomes a kind of an accounting nightmare. What Grant County has chosen to do is go down the path of saying we have core customers and we have non-core customers. The data centers are in the non-core customer category. And so we are able to isolate costs, the substations that are attributed to them, plus additional upgrades that are necessary to support the delivery of power. That all goes into their costs, and they actually are paying those costs and some more on top of that. So we're charging them above their actual estimated costs so that we can ensure that the core customer is not being harmed. That regulatory result is almost impossible when you're talking about the Utility Transportation Commission, because it's almost anathema to how the law works when you're talking about the State Utility Commission managing investor-owned utilities. But if you happen to be a consumer-owned utility, you're in a better position because you're actually able to make these adjustments. More than half of the load served in Washington State comes from consumer-owned.
As you can tell, I would probably just be able to keep asking them questions all night, but I probably should open it up to the crowd. Caitlin has a microphone. If you're out there and would like to raise your hand and ask a question, please feel free. Otherwise, I will pose a couple more. Just mention your name and who you want to address, if you would.
Hi, I'm David Camp from 350 Spokane. This is probably for Paul and for Brian. I wonder if you could reflect on the new transmission authority that we now have. A lot of us have worked very hard to get this. Is it a good thing?
Can you say what it is first?
Oh, pardon me. The state bill that just passed. Are you familiar?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So what is the bill first, and then what's your thought about it?
Basically, well, I'm going to oversimplify it probably, but we have created a new authority in the state that will be looking at and have ultimately the ability, though I don't think it's funded for the ability to do so now, to invest in transmission on behalf of the state. And where I think this is important, and you heard my opening comments, we need more grid. We need more grid to solve these problems. We need more grid to enable load growth. We need more grid to enable reliability. We need more grid to enable the clean energy transformation that is happening here. So I see transmission as a great enabler of all the things that we need to accomplish. A transmission authority by itself, I don't think solves the issue, but I think it creates another tool in the toolbox, to use a much overused analogy, to say if there is a lack of capital to bring a transmission line online, if there is a need to bring dollars into that project in order to get it off the ground, we have another tool in that toolbox. I will say I don't think capital is the biggest issue with transmission development, but where I think the state getting involved helps is that now you have an incentive, you have skin in the game of the state to say this is an investment we are making for the state. We have the ability to make money off of this investment. Our permitting and review of that transmission line will probably be a little bit different if we're thinking about something that the state is invested in versus just having equity investors invested in it.
Yeah, not my favorite piece of legislation that's passed recently, to be honest with you. I have spent most of my career in integrated markets. We're not in an integrated market right now, but if you were to poll the average American, about 250 million Americans are being served power in integrated markets. So think Southwest Power Pool, or the MISO is another one, PJM. These are all names of integrated marketplaces, and they are regional markets, and they're regional for a reason. We have a state with good intentions trying to create local solutions to regional problems. I need a power line that goes from Seattle all the way down to Phoenix, and I don't need it to wiggle around in the state for a while before it passes the border going south. I need it to be the most efficient and the highest voltage possible, which requires that we all as a group come together and say, yep, that's a regional solution, and here's your state's allocation. Are we going to get that from a local interest? I'm not entirely sure we will. I have yet to see them do well, because almost 100% of the time, you'll get local politics involved. So, but is it a step in the right direction? At least we're thinking about the problem, and one thing that Washington can do to help us is reduce the complexity and time it takes to find a route and actually get a power line built. So I will.
Seems like a good idea, but I worry about the analogy with freeways, where we're still living with the legacy, and communities are living with legacy of just, let's just build it and worry about it later, and then communities suffer for generations, or we lose those critical habitats. And so I think we all want to have and need more grid, but just saying, just build the stuff, why don't we build stuff anymore, also seems to dismiss the fact that our history on this isn't great. It's littered with more bad examples than good. Why would that just not be a repeat?
I absolutely agree with you, but we predicated our meeting here on the urgency. And so if we have true urgency in solving an existential problem, then we have to be willing to take those risks.
Dr. Yang?
Thank you. I'm debating, I have a two-part question. I'm debating how.
One part.
Okay. So we have seen a lot of those projections on the energy usage, whether it's data center or AI. One of the things some of the panelists mentioned about, there are newer technology being developed, right, including NVIDIA is developing cooling systems for data centers. There are also other battery technology being developed. So I'm curious about the projection of those, if we were to factor in the innovation on saving on energy consumption, better cooling, better battery technologies, how would those chart changes? Is anyone working on those projections?
Joshua, do you want to start, as far as you know?
I don't have thanks for the question. I don't have a sense of what kind of energy savings, like quantifiable energy savings we would get from those kinds of efficiency technologies. Now, the other part we have to think about is there's a water impact too, right? So you're either cooling a data center with energy by circulating air, or you're cooling it with water by appropriating, oftentimes, significant amounts of water. You could potentially create efficiencies on both sides. Now, what's the quantifiably, how much energy efficiency do you get? I mean, you still need an enormous amount of power, energy to power the servers, on the kind of operations side. But the way I think about it is, we need all of this stuff, and when you add it all up in the aggregate, it's significant. And this is true on the transmission side too. Just to switch a little bit, what we've been kind of debating here really has to do with like greenfield corridors, with building new transmission lines through new rights of way. Well, there's a lot of stuff that we can do outside of creating new transmission rights of way. There's grid enhancing technologies. There's cool new innovative technologies that like pull more juice out of the grid. There's like sensors, and there's software that figures out how to route power around the grid. And then, there's like co-locating transmission lines as well. You can put transmission lines along highways. There's a right-of-way already there because there's a highway there. But like, strangely, we don't allow ourselves to do that. So, all of this stuff, these are all seem like small solutions. on the energy side with efficiency and with like small scale renewables and microgrids and all these things, and on the transmission side with like these new technologies, but they add up to be, I think, impactful in the end.
Yes. Can I jump in on that answer just a little bit? If you don't mind, thank you. First, I want to start with we need more grid, but we need to use the grid we have more efficiently, undoubtedly true. And a mantra of mine at the UTC this year has been, we must utilize before we capitalize. And so I think utilizing the structures that we have, grid enhancing technologies, and just simply utilizing the grid, a lot of it sits idle or more idle for a lot of the time. How do we use this opportunity that we have to utilize the grid more? I'm gonna answer your question in a three-part answer, because you offered a two-part question. I think forecasting is the most important challenge that we have to face right away. We see this huge spike in need, and it's like rush off and let's go build stuff. I actually think you're seeing an entire industry say, whoa, I don't know if that's real, because that seems way too much versus the history that we are familiar with. And in Washington particularly, a rush to building stuff because of the promise of load growth is acutely remembered by many. So I think absolutely you will see greater efficiency in the data center industry. You've seen that over time. They have a great profit incentive to make themselves more efficient. I will also predict that the water issue is not something that we're talking about a lot in 10 years, because I think the use of water will be through a once pulled from a water source, an aquifer or a river, and then cooled over and over and over. What that means is we're gonna need a lot more electricity to keep that water cooled. So this will continue to be an energy discussion.
Yeah, okay, I'll promise real quick. So that's what we do all day long. We forecast loads, and this is a question that we've had. So as we've seen, a number of our data centers are transitioning to liquid cooled, and what we're seeing is that their demand isn't going down. What they do is they're able to do more computes. If you suddenly had quantum computing, which allows you to do 10 times the amount of computing from normal chips, our forecast is we're not going to see a decrease in load, because the true constraint is the ability to serve power. They will take as much power as we can supply them, and they'll get all the computes they can out of that. So don't expect to see power to come down as a result.
Efficiency will go up and consumption will go up. And so, Eric, yeah, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, Eric Grabowski, technology nerd, citizen at large, live in Spokane here. So I applaud everybody for seeing an existential threat, and I know Brian, and I'm real interested in power and AI, and have kind of followed the construction industry for a while. My question is more maybe policy, but with two states, Washington and Oregon, that have passed a lot of great legislation, and I like these different classes in Grant County PUD of ratepayers. What challenges do you see when the rest of the country, or large parts of the country, or our federal government are kind of in opposition? And I guess one sign of that is, will we start losing data centers? Will we start losing tax monies and the economic growth that helps even fuel what we're trying to do? So what challenges do you see with operating in a state with different regulations and laws that are different than, say, Idaho or our federal government?
Let's start with you, Joshua.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, yeah, I think what we don't want to see is a race to the bottom, right? We don't want to see data center operators going to the states with the least regulations or with the dirtiest, cheapest power. It's interesting, we here in the PNW have arguably some of the most progressive climate and clean energy policies in the country. And even we are struggling here with, keeping, whether we're gonna have significant gas-powered energy facilities that have to stay online into the next 10, 15, 20 years. Even with, arguably some of the most, we're considered by a lot of folks to be like the laboratory for the clean energy transition. There are other states in the country where they're thinking about delaying the decommissioning of coal plants because of the load presented by data centers. I mean, that's like really dirty stuff. That's the dirtiest stuff. So I take your point. I think we want to make sure that, again, we don't have a race to the bottom. Data centers are not bad things. I think it was pointed out, like we need them for maps and cat videos and all your kids' graduation pictures. Like we need data centers, and they're fine. They're necessary, maybe necessary evils. And we, it'd be great if we could kind of lift up the whole country with good clean energy policy. But you're right. There are some political headwinds from the federal government and some other states that don't have similar policies to us.
Yeah, well, a lot of thoughts there. I think Josh just mentioned a lot of the challenges and the headwinds that we're seeing. Those are making our job, I think, much more difficult. I mean, we start from a great spot here in the Pacific Northwest, though, from a carbon-free energy perspective. And so we really are trying to sort of close a gap. I will just say that we have been successful at accomplishing one piece of our clean energy transformation. Is we were required by 2026 to remove all coal-fired generation from rates of customers in Washington. And so we issued orders in December that accomplished that goal. So one item done, but what is interesting is one of those coal plants, the coal strip plant in Montana, purchased by a utility in Montana that is looking to do data center development in Montana, right? So the challenges here is we can have individual states looking at a policy, but we recognize that we're working in a regional, national, and global economy, and that gets to be a lot more challenging. I think the headwinds are challenging, but I also, going back to my opening points, is the largest providers of data center services are also companies that have their own clean energy and sustainability commitments. And it really is kind of incumbent on their customers, many of whom are us in this room. I realize that gets more challenging, but their large customers, just holding them accountable to say, show us that you've actually accomplished that goal. And to me, that is another piece of this puzzle. Is there's sort of the formal regulatory process and the informal regulatory process of the market.
We're running long on time, and so even though I would love to continue this as long as I possibly could, maybe a couple of concluding thoughts, and I'm going to invite Jay up because you forgot to talk about your conference later in the week. So come on up. But there are lots of opportunities for public that are here and online to participate in processes that are kind of wonky and narrow. There are rate cases before the UTC regularly. There's opportunities for public comment on the clean energy implementation plans and the integrated resource plans. And the public is invited to comment, and it makes a difference. The thousands of pages that Chairman Rybarek was mentioning make a difference on the rulings that they make, and whether we as citizens participate in those democratic processes affects the outcomes of the way that we generate electricity. And that's the same at the legislature as well. 2515 regulating data centers didn't pass this time. Well, what will happen in the long session next spring here in Washington? Will it pass? Well, that depends on who's representing us and whether they hear from us. And so, are we doing what we can as citizens to be able to engage in the democratic process to make a difference? We are the laboratories, for, to help the world try and figure these things out. And so let's show that we can be a good laboratory for figuring these things out. Jay has a great conference I wanted to mention for him, but before he does, let's thank our speakers for tonight. Jay has a conference later this week that you should all come to.
Thank you, Brian. First, I think that really learned a lot from the panelists. Really enjoy listening to them and listening to the questions. Later this week, Thursday, we have a Value and Responsibility in AI Technologies conference. This Thursday, right here in this area. We still have a few spots left for registration. We have some flyers on the table over there in the back. Please, there's a QR code. Feel free to put it. I think the free food for Gonzaga student and faculty. If you're educator, also free. I have a special code for you. If you really need a VIP code, I can still also give that to you. Really, is the purpose of the conference is really to think about that how can we collectively shape how AI is helping humanity, of course, thinking about energy, climate as well. Like you said, it's not just about AI, it's data centers, right? A lot of things are flowing things. You tax something. I told my kids were telling me that, hey, watch this and watch that for the climate. I said, yeah, turn off that light and stop working on Instagram. So it's a lot of things that we're working on. Interestingly, even though I'm a technologist, I don't use AI that much, probably less than you, Paul. I need to give him a hard time because he has been trying to say something bad about bulldogs. So, anyways, thank you. So flyers in the back, AI conference on Thursday, and workshops on Fridays.
Thank you all. And come chat with our students in the back. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you next time.